All right, welcome everybody who's joined us today for Access Granted Part 1. I'm David Haynes. I'm the Information Security Officer here at Augment, who's I'm sure some of you may have seen me on other webinars here at Augment. I'm sure people are familiar with Sai, who's run our Intune series. Sai, you want to?
Yeah, Intune series I did a forward series. You can check that on our YouTube channel. I have 12 years of MSP experience, last four focusing on cybersecurity. I'm on the support team. Yeah,
And we put together this series just because we've seen repeated what we think are general misunderstandings on conditional access and what we see as sort of best practices, both in terms of how to do it in Augment, but then also configuring conditional access in your own environments for protection. Just wanted to, we'll start off with like a high level overview of the catches that we've come across, um, and hopefully give some good information through there. Levi's in the chat, who's going to do his best to kind of moderate questions for us, but feel free to draw questions in the chat, and we'll get to them as we can. Um, and if anything comes up, feel free to reach out to us after the chat if you wanted to have a one-on-one session. Um, so jumping on, that's our lovely pictures. You'll see us as we go. So setting up conditional access policies, and where things go wrong. Um,
yeah,
the main one is no planning leading to no protection. Um, the metaphor that I use as information security professionals is to think of it more like a physical security. The way in which you would protect a coffee shop or a grocery store is different than you would for like a weapons manufacturer or a bank, or a law office. It's probably more in line with the MSP space, but a coffee shop might need just a deadbolt on the door and a monitored alarm versus a more secure facility needing security cameras or arm guards or biometric authentication. Um, and so having that understanding of how your customers deserve to be protected as part of your plan, I think, is something that gets missed because it's not a one size shoe fitting all. Um, but at the same time, you want to be able to standardize, which I think is the challenge within the MSP spaces.
yeah. Like in theory versus reality. In theory, this plan makes sense, but in reality, like feasibility of installing security cameras where you're watching a farm may be more difficult than it is realistic. So, uh,
Exactly, yeah. Um, and then also the big one on the last bullet point is how the policies are supposed to work versus reality. We see time and time again policies that on the surface the security intention is good, but once actually implemented, it turns out that the policy doesn't actually do either what it was intended to do, or doesn't work at all to provide any protection. It's just a line item on the in conditional access, um,
yeah,
and we
it's
see
like
that a
naming
lot.
is important.
Yeah, naming. We see a lot with exactly that the naming conventions. Sure, Sai has horror stories, and I've seen them as well.
Yes,
Policies
and
and
sorry.
no, go
Yeah,
ahead.
like
Go for it.
yeah. Yeah, naming. So I've seen it before. I'm sure you have too. You come up with a name for something. It makes sense at the time, but then over time that changes, right? You add on to it, you subtract, you change it. And I've run into environments where a policy is named one thing and it does something entirely different. Um, if you don't standardize your naming conventions, you don't keep to a platform, then it can be very quickly out of hand when you're like putting out fires and quickly adding exceptions or making modifications to like let something in. Those quickly fall out of control. And then when you add on new staff or scale up, it's hard for someone to step in and kind of understand what's going on there or troubleshoot later. It becomes kind of like a spaghetti nest, kind of like the server room where the wires get all when you first put the wires in, they're all labeled and put up nicely. Then over time, that just becomes a spaghetti mess of strangled wires and knots.
Exactly. Yeah, you'll have policies that say MFA all users, and then you look into it, and it's actually doing session control and location based things, and it's only specific to certain devices. And so it makes it really hard to manage the policy stack that you have, but then also debug issues of why can't a user log in from their laptop while they're traveling, or why is it that, or how is it that we got breached? Oh, it's because buried in a policy was a setting that allowed that breach to happen. So having one policy do a single action, generally, there are some exceptions or but one policy, one action is our opinion, the best, easiest way to keep things clean. And you can have up to 198 conditional access policies in Entra. Not that you should have that many, but in our testing environments, we've definitely hit that limit.
Yeah, more is better when in doubt.
Yeah,
Um, I think you mentioned MFA, so
yeah,
it's a good point there. MFA, multi-factor authentication, something you have, something you know. This is a very critical in this day and age. It used to be kind of like an optional nice to have. No longer is that the case. Exploits are so rampant that you need to have MFA, and not just regular MFA. You can't use text or email MFA anymore. Those are now vulnerable. So using the right form of MFA is important. Using application-based or POTP-based MFA, that's
yeah.
critical. And it's important to make sure you have a scalable MFA enforcement. Per user MFA is not very scalable. If you forget to turn it on, forget to enforce it, that person's vulnerable. Even if you register MFA, but you don't have enforcement on, it's still vulnerable to be circumvented.
You've given them a key, but the lock isn't on the door.
Correct.
And that top one location doesn't equal authentication. We see that frequently of MFA enforced only in certain locations, either outside of the office. Sometimes, again, that gets flipped around of um, MFA is only enforced in the office, leaving outside logins vulnerable or without having MFA enforced. Um, so really a blanket MFA all users policy to enforce MFA, and then another policy on top of that to enforce specific types of MFA to privileged roles or privileged actions. Um,
Yeah. I can show you what those look like. So we
yeah,
can set some of those up right now. For those of you that aren't familiar with conditional access, so you need an Entra ID P1 license for conditional access. That's included in Business Premium. Let me show you here. I'll just share my screen. So I'm logged into our test little demo tenant here. So I'm in the conditional access field. You can get to here multiple ways. Entra ID. You can go navigate to Entra ID, and then on the left-hand side, there's conditional access. I'll just show you real quick. You can also search at the top in Azure for conditional access. But once you're here, you can kind of review your policies that you currently have in your environment. Sometimes Microsoft will have their own managed policies that get created. I'll create one from scratch here to show you what it looks like. So, uh, great question about break class accounts. I'll cover that a little bit too. We have more on that later. But talking about naming conventions, we want to focus on what we're doing, MFA, enforce, and then we'll say all users. So typically, Microsoft used to have the recommendation for break glass accounts to be exempt from your policies, which you should when you're first deploying them and developing them. However, it is now recommended by Microsoft that you do enforce MFA on that break glass account in addition to having it separate from your policies. MFA is still something that needs to be enforced for security purposes. So here we have MFA all enforce all users. So we're going to select the scope of who we're applying to, users all, and target resources. So in this case, we're going to do all resources. We're going to protect everything. Um, for conditions, we simply just want the conditions, no conditions. We want this to apply in all scenarios. So all resources, all users grant access if they have MFA. So we set that up. By default, it's going to want to exclude your account. This is Microsoft kind of a safety net here. In case your policy is going to break something, you're exempt. You can go and fix it. Good recommendation, break loss account. You add that as an exception. The way you would do that is you go here, exclude, users and group, and you would select your break loss account from that search menu.
I just dropped in the chat the Microsoft documentation page on how to best handle break glass accounts. The recommendation is phishing resistant MFA enforced. That'll be the next policy that we show for MFA.
So when we create that policy, it does some latency when it shows up. Once it shows up here, you can review it. We did it in report only mode. Report only mode is a nice way to test out a new policy. There's an option for view policy impact. If you set a policy in your tenant for a while, you can review view policy impact. It'll show you the data of like what accounts it applied to in order to take effect. If you're worried about the impact, that's a good way to safely do that. Another policy we want to have, we have MFA for enforce all users. That's great. Now I know my clients, once I turn that on, my environment is safe. Everyone has MFA. However, some MFA is not created equal. There is more available options for MFA. I might want to secure my admins more securely. So I'm going to enforce phishing resistant MFA, and I'll say for admins. So what I can do here is I'm going to apply select users and groups. I'm going to select anyone that has a direct role with administrator. So here I can search and I can go ahead and select everyone. Unfortunately, Microsoft doesn't have an easy way to do this. You have to select. They do have a template you can select for administrators. However, it only selects about 14 administrator roles. We find there's other admin roles that you may have in your environment that don't get selected for that environment. So this is kind of like the more
More
surefire way
robust.
to cover
Yeah.
all your administrators. Boom, boom, boom. It's a real pain to do this every time. We'll talk about that later as well.
Yeah. And with phishing resistant, there's a couple different ways that that gets put into place. Yeah, there's the Microsoft Authenticator with number matching, Windows Hello, the temporary access pass are all phishing resistant as well. FIDO2 keys. Number of our partners are reselling FIDO keys to their customers, just kind of a way to get back into that hardware resale space. Speaking from experience, I've lost my internal key that I use here at Augment. So our support team disabled my original key and procured me a new one. Um, so there's kind of a little bit of a resale opportunity there. Not that that's going to make a huge difference, but it's just another entryway there.
Yeah, and sometimes you have environments where users might be resistant to using their cell phones for MFA. I've had
Yeah.
it where I worked for nonprofits. I had very strict, stringent things about requirements. So typically, the security key is a good roundabout way to get around those methods, but still enforce security.
Yeah.
Um,
Anybody who says, "Oh, I don't want to have authenticator on my phone," or you don't want to deploy out Intune management to compliant devices on people's personal devices, um, having that FIDO key is the solution.
so similar as before, grant access instead of requiring MFA. I'm going to go require MF authentication strength, and I'll select phishing resistant MFA. Hit select. I would turn it on for report only. Uh, you saw earlier, select all the roles. We're similar as before, all cloud apps. One thing to warrant you as a warning here for phishing resistant MFA. In order to turn this on, it is important that you first enable phishing resistant MFA methods in your tenant. So the way you would do that is you navigate to your authentication methods. This won't really work well for if you're in per user MFA, but if you go to authentication methods, you can see what policies you have in place, whether they're enabled or not. So, we talked about the FIDO, the passkeys, FIDO2. There's software OAuth tokens. That's like the password managers, like putting it in there, the code, and getting that 6-digit number. And then there's a authenticator, Microsoft authenticators. Those would be methods that you could use. If you don't have any of those enabled or enforced, then and you turn on that policy, you can lock yourself out. So make sure you have that
Yeah.
tested embedded first. Probably test it with 1 or 2 users before you apply it to the whole company or all your
And
admins.
and while you're here, side, you want to just disable SMS as an MFA type.
Yes.
So the reason why you want to disable SMS and voice call is that there's been a growth of SIM jacking attacks where an attacker will call up the cell phone provider. They've already been able to glean enough information about a target, who they are, where they live, the last 3 digits of their social insurance number, enough information so that way when they call Verizon or Comcast or Telus up in Canada, they can pretend to be you and get a new SIM card for that when they go to register MFA, they get the MFA code and are able to log in. Um, So disabling those two MFA types will prevent those sort of attacks coming in.
If you can't turn off the email one, the reason that it can't turn it off is because by default it's using your password reset policy. So you have to go and modify your password reset policy to uninclude email.
Yeah.
Once you save that, it takes some time to sync, but then you should be able to remove that email password as a method. So yeah, those are the conditional access policies for MFA that you can enforce. We'll talk about exceptions later, but we did kind of cover a little bit. If you go to the exclude tab, you can do so. We can go back to the slide and see what we have next.
Perfect. So we touched on don't do per user. Again, per user MFA, that's Microsoft has themselves called it the legacy MFA method. They've been saying that it's going to be removed from the platform for about 2 years now. They keep delaying the removal of it. You aren't able to enforce phishing resistant MFA methods with it. Like I said, it takes a lot of manual effort to ensure that people are registered properly. Conditional access policies make it a lot easier. That last line, don't let Microsoft manage your security, meant to touch on the Microsoft managed conditional access policies. Microsoft got fed up with people not configuring their own conditional access policies. So if you had a P1 license or P2, they were just going to enable conditional access policies for you, force people to use their stack. That is great, keeps people protected when if they've missed that stage in their deployment, but also it leaves you out of the conversation loop about what's going on in the environment. And the same thing with security defaults. Security defaults is fine for people who can't afford or don't want to pay for that P1, P2 license. I understand that it's an additional expense, but security defaults has a number of flaws in its deployment that leave people vulnerable. There's the way where MFA gets enforced and when is up to Microsoft's algorithms. At times, there's also a 14-day grace period where the account is created, but then for the next 2 weeks, MFA isn't required. So that leaves a vulnerability there unless you force that enrollment. So it's always best if you do have a conditional access policy license, deploy out a stack that you're comfortable with to the customer.
A lot of use cases where security defaults can break things in the environment.
Yeah.
So we've
Um,
enforced MFA. We think we're pretty secure for that. The other part of this, we have seen that you know, we have a more vibrant hybrid workforce is more prevalent. People are no longer in a physical office, or they work from home as well, or they work remote. There's so many ways to get into your environment. So we have MFA to control, give some security on the accounts, but like where do the accounts have access from? By default, it's kind of like anywhere and everywhere you can specify. One of the ways you can lock that down is device compliance. You kind of control like the entry points to your environment. So, if you had a physical building, you'd have like checkpoints, maybe a security guard or an ID badge. Device compliance basically lets you enforce policies where you can only access from certain devices that are marked compliant. So you enroll your device in Intune environment. You have compliance policy to check to make sure it has security settings that you deem essential, such as like encryption, password on your screen, antivirus is enabled, whatever you determine.
the browsers are updated, the OS is updated.
Yeah. And so this is critical, especially like if people are using different methods of MFA that might not be as secure. It gives you another like extra security layer there.
Yeah.
So I can kind
And
of
the big
show you.
one, whilst I was starting the pulling up the demo, the big one that comes up is my user clicked on a link that was sent to them, and that link hijacked a token, and now they're breached. And we'll show the token protection policy in a bit here, but device compliance is really the surefire way to prevent those kind of attacks happening of MFA token jacking.
Yeah, so I'll show you those two policies. Might as well go over both of them here. So we're back into our demo environment. I believe that's popping up now. Great. Those are previous policies. So we'll start with the device compliance policy. So there's some things to keep in mind with device compliance. Require device compliance. So all users. Um, In order for this to work, you first of all have to have a compliance policy configured in Intune to check what is compliant or what isn't compliant, and you have to have devices registered in Intune. It's important to know that if you don't have that set up and you set up a policy for to require device compliance, technically no one is compliant if you don't have those set up, so everyone could get locked out of your environment. So just a grain of
And
salt.
that has happened. We've had some support calls of, hey, we deployed these policies out and now no one can get in. How do we fix that? And it's like, well, you changed the locks and threw away any keys. Um, so unfortunately, it's a Microsoft support call at that point, not an Augment support call.
So there's a
Um,
way to do this. I'm going to use the built-in one because it's kind of nice. So they have a policy template. We can do, believe it's in remote work. Yes. Required device compliant device. We want this one. Yeah.
you can see in the
So
templates that there's a few different ones. There's require compliant or hybrid uh, devices or multi-factor authentication for all users. Um, there's a couple different ways in which their templates work but don't work. Because that doesn't necessarily enforce compliant device. So there, you see the first one there is require admins protecting your admin center and those privileged roles. The last one there in the preview is require it for all access for all users, and that's the most secure one where everybody has to be on a compliant device where you know it is secure. Um,
so we can do it reportedly. I'll show you. We'll kind of create this and kind of go through the settings here to show you what to get set. Uh, Devices. Oh, good question, Simon. What if the device is entered joined rather than hybrid? Will that not be compliant? You get to choose the compliance. So it doesn't have to be hybrid, it just needs to be market compliant. So you go here into the grant controls. Uh, so here, required device to be marked as compliant. You don't have to choose the hybrid joint device. You can if you want to. You can choose both controls or one control, depends on your environment. But in our case here, just device compliance. This is important for you to have environments where there's no hybrid. Maybe it's cloud only. So it just needs to be marked as compliant. So it's an Intune, it's marked as compliant. That's what this is checking for. So again, this is all users, all cloud apps. The control in place here is required device to be marked as compliant. If you end up going more secure, maybe you have a higher environment, you can require all selected controls. You can select more than one. It needs to be compliant, and also be hybrid joined. Maybe you have a setting where that's required.
and you can see don't lock yourself out. Make sure that your device is compliant as that little pop-up menu.
Yeah.
Um, you can definitely lock yourself out.
Is there a way to set it to be only enter join devices that are compliant? So you can scope it to not be all users. That's where that's where the user part is important. There's also, I was kind of going into it earlier, but I don't want to get into the grasp with it. But for Convised, you can filter for devices. So you can have a custom config for specifically enter join devices. So it wouldn't check for, but that's more kind of granular of like what kind of
Yeah.
context you're doing. You can filter that based on the naming convention or like the device join type. There's a lot of different settings there in some Microsoft documentation I can get you later. But yeah, required device compliant. So we can exclude platforms if we want to. That's what Microsoft's trying to do right away. If you don't exclude those, typically personal devices, if you have Outlook on your phone and it's not marked compliant because you have Intune, that will get locked out. So it's possible if you want to scope it to just work devices, you can go into client apps. The client apps are filter for devices, client apps, device platforms. You can configure it to be just specifically perhaps only Windows and Mac OS. Like that way your mobile phones are excluded. That's something you could do if you wanted to.
And on here, this is a good opportunity to show the uh, uh, service provider exclusions. So if you
Yes.
so service provider exclusions are a way in which your team using the CSP center or the partner center to gain access into the customer environment can still get access to their enter environment outside of what their conditional policy stack says. So this is definitely more relevant for like location-based policies, or maybe your own internal compliance policies are separate from what the your customer's environment is, or especially with Augment, the way in which Augment works, our servers are never going to be marked as a compliant device. So searching um, the your tenant in here and adding that as an exclusion will allow both like Augment as a platform or any of the other platforms that you may be hooking into Enter environments, or your own MSP environment as that exclusion. And so you can set it to all service provider exclusions, trust everybody who has a partner relationship, or you can name a Enter environment. So here, size grabbing Augment. So anybody coming from Augment via the partner center is excluded from this policy. So if ever you have any issues gaining access, there's that for you. And this kind of ties back to that break glass account. You can have your customers have no break glass account exclusions except for excluding your system users or your Enter environment from those policies. So if you have specific like location-based policies, you don't need to include a break glass that's local to the environment. You protect your own users with your own policies, and they can still gain access to their customer's environment.
And exclusions, something we'll touch on more later and keep circling back to. Anytime you make an exclusion, you want to make sure what exclusion or exceptions you have are compensated for some of the control in place.
Yeah,
So we'll touch on it. So
and
that's how you
that's
make a compliant policy.
that ties in nicely to legacy authentication. Um, I'm sure everybody here deals with customers who have an old scanner that they are hooked on using. You can't upgrade it; either costs too much, or does the job good enough. So there's no real reason to upgrade it beyond the security break in it. Old machining equipment or factory equipment, maybe running Windows XP, Windows Vista, Windows 7, that would just cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to replace. And those machines, maybe they need to spit out a report into Excel every now and then. So they do have a legitimate reason to be connected to the internet, but you want to block legacy authentication for all other users, um, so that those more vulnerable authentication types are not available to your general staff, your general users, and that's where you have that layering effect of those policies. Um, the example, like some of the reasons why you want to block that, there's been stories of like law offices having their scanners breached and having an attacker just sitting in there waiting for either a payout from a lawsuit, and they can intercept that and send the law office false routing information for the payments, or it's
Yeah.
a competitor waiting for insider information about a business transaction that's about to happen. So there's lots of reasons to have an attacker want to sit on old machines like this,
Yeah.
or just cause downtime even.
I went to I think DEF CON 2 years ago, and they were talking about specifically this token export and how it can be exploited in a way where one client had gotten compromised. They didn't know they got compromised. The malicious actor had replaced their signature, like kind of a book with me link, with like a malicious link. That link would steal whoever clicked on it, steal their token, and the link looked fine. People could still schedule stuff whatsoever because it just like relayed the information. But the compromise spread like wildfire, and it took them weeks to find out what had gone wrong because they were like tracking it down to find the initial vector, and then they found that, and it was like crazy.
Yeah.
So
I can't imagine how frustrating that would have been to have found.
yeah,
Um, that kind of ties back into like device compliance. If their devices are all compliant, then nobody can do that.
yeah. If you
Um,
have the device compliance policy in place, even if they stole your token, unless they had your physical device, they wouldn't be able to get in.
yeah.
So here we have a policy set up. I'm going to go over some of the
Oh,
nuances.
sorry, I stole your screen, so I'll let
Okay.
you steal it back.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So we have this token protection policy. So I'm applying to all users. I've excluded our service accounts so that way our integration still works for our partner portal and augment integration. Show you the nuances. So I have it configured for all apps, and I have it set to require token protection for sign-in sessions. And I believe creating this will give me an error. Yeah. So it has to be scoped to supported platforms. So I have to go in and fix that. So we go back in, token protection. So I go back and I select all users, target resources. So you can't select all apps. In this case, you have to limit it to specific resources. And those resources are just two. Research for Office 365. And the only two you can scope it to are Exchange Online and SharePoint Online. That protects your email and your SharePoint/OneDrive directories. We go in, we select the required token protection. Believe we should be set. We'll see here. Oh, there's one more issue that comes up. You have to scope it also to specific devices. So we saw this a little bit earlier. Device platforms. You can only scope it to Windows. They're testing it for Mac and iOS. So we try it for Mac. I think it only is Windows. Let's see here if it lets us go through. Oh, I have to create. Yeah. So that's our token protection. So all users applied specifically to the apps for 365 Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, required token protection, and scope it down to specific devices, device platforms, which right now it's Mac, iOS, and Windows are supported. So I could expand it to iOS if I want to. You'll know your environment better. Perhaps you only need it for certain devices. Maybe you just don't allow login from other devices. That's up to you. Again, similar from before, whenever deploying any kind of conditional access policy, recommend you scope it down, have a break glass account, test it with a small subset of users before you turn it on for everyone. And if you're worried about it, when you implement a policy, like I mentioned before you turn it on, report only, you can view policy impact, and we'll kind of pull data from your logins when you have data coming in and show you where it would take effect and where it wouldn't. So like potential block points or breakpoints are a good thing to look for. But those two policies would really improve the security, would mitigate the vectors for malicious actors entering your environment.
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry. I went off script and I showed the legacy auth policy or page. So I
Oh yeah,
was ahead of you. If you wanted to do the
yeah. I'll show the
setting up
legacy
that
auth.
policy.
Totally. So yeah, legacy authentication, another great one. So we talked about that, the use cases of why it's important to block that. So you need to block legacy authentication because there's a lot of older applications that don't support MFA, like Office 2013 scanners that we talked about. But scanners probably still need to work. Uh, that's where we make exceptions. So we apply it to all users. We would exclude whatever scanner account. Perhaps you have a security group called service accounts that are exempt from MFA or legacy authentication. That'd be a way to track that, and you can know all cloud apps. We're gonna do the conditions, device platforms. Sorry, no, session control. Sorry, where I go
There's
here.
too many menus to keep track of.
Conditions, client apps. Here we go.
Client apps.
So
Yeah.
here we limit what apps specifically. Uh, so we configure this. We don't want to allow logins from these legacy authentication applications. So any other applications that include all like POP, IMAP, SMTP, it's like old Exchange servers or custom Exchange browser applications. We turn that off. Exchange Active Clients, that's the old legacy Office 2013 or older for Exchange. So what we do is we enforce that only modern authentication is allowed. Again, if you want to report only to start, test it out, all the same spiel there. But yeah, all cloud apps, all users, and you would exclude here whatever directory roles, sorry, not directory roles, but any service accounts or service group. So typically what you would do is, we have this, grant or session. Oh, okay.
Grant control, then block, then say select.
Oh, thank you.
Block.
Oh, well, Oh, so then I have to invert this. So this is a common thing too, where we would essentially just configure block these older ones um, and create.
There's a couple
Uh,
questions in the Q&A. If an OS is not included and is included by implication, do we need to have it excluded? So if Windows is included, will Mac OS automatically be excluded, or do we need to exclude it?
Great
Um,
question. So it depends on the way you have your policy, if it's a block or an allow policy. So if you don't specify an OS, um, if you have it set to grant, like if it's grant control and you include Windows, Mac OS will automatically be excluded. Yes. You don't need to. So I guess it depends like what the policy is here. So for example, if we go to our this one, our we didn't set up let's use the token protection. So here we did include like a device platform limitation. So we included devices. So we want token protection to apply to Windows, Mac OS, and iOS. If we don't choose those and we have only Windows selected for token protection, then it's only going to apply to Windows. That means Mac OS devices will not have any token protection policy applied to it. So yes, by default, it is excluded. So you don't need to exclude it. It's kind of redundant to also exclude it. The reason why you have exclusions are sometimes you have layered policies and it might make sense, but you want to be careful when you start layering to make sure you have the right thought process behind it. I've had it where people layered policies incorrectly, excluding it, and then creating a huge security hole. So whenever you have
yeah.
exceptions, make sure you book the right thought process to cover for those exceptions. Like we just talked about legacy authentication. Um, what happens if an OS is both included and excluded? Which one wins? That's a great question. Typically,
It,
Microsoft will default to the most secure option. Um, so go ahead,
yeah,
dude.
the way in which I kind of like metaphor conditional access policies as someone's going through the authentication flow, it's kind of like Microsoft set up like a Plinko ball machine, and the ball falling down the chute is the conditional access policies. It smashes them all into one, but the path that the ball takes is the most secure path. So if you have a path that says MFA for all users, and then another policy that says MFA or exclude this user from MFA, it's still going to enforce MFA on that user because that's the most secure option. Um, so that'd be the same across all the different includes and excludes there.
Yeah.
That's also another reason that we see mistakes come up of burying exclusions in policies that don't necessarily need to be there. You've included all users, but then you've excluded a group of um, select users intentionally when it should have been built in a policy of like include this subset of users. So having clear design connections um, and plans there.
So in this example, we have like let's say we have a scanner in the office. We need to scan the email. So that scanner, in order to work, we have an old scanner. We don't have the budget to get a new scanner. It's expensive, but we need scanned email functionality. So what we would do is we would exempt it from probably our MFA policy and our block legacy authentication policy. But when we do that, that account is now wide open, very vulnerable. So this is where we talk about exclusions having compensating factors and using proper naming conventions. So rather than doing one-offs of user accounts, it's pretty good to organize it with groups. Personally, I would create like a group, like service accounts, like exempt BLA, exempt MFA, whatever. So it's very obvious to me or whoever else is going in. If I add that scanner count to that group, I would add that group to exceptions for these two policies, but I need something to protect it. So what I would typically do is I would create a named location. That scanner is not going anywhere. It lives on the office site. The office has a static IP address. I would simply add like an office IP address, like office location, mark as a trusted location, and I would add like an IP range for that address, a static IP address. You have to end it in that -32 or whatever your subset is. Maybe you have multiple IP addresses, but -32 will give you a specific IP address. Once you create that, you can create a new policy where basically it says there's a couple options. You have an option either making an MFA policy where that account will be prompted for MFA anywhere except for the office, or you can just block access anywhere except the office. More secure that way. But that's typically how we compensate for those things. And that kind of touches more on we start to bleed into like locations and different ways to set that up and layering. I think that's going to be a topic for
Goes
later.
back to our first slide of location isn't MFA. Um, and so we have a whole our next episode is all about MFA protect or location based policies. Because there's a lot of we like different ways of setting it up and some gotchas in there. Um, I'm going to drop out of the presentation here quickly. So we've gone through the process. You've built the policies in your enter environment, or you've already done this exercise and you already have a stack of policies that you're comfortable with. Um, and you're now working in Augment. You may see, oh, we already come, like the platform already comes with 14 policies that address a lot of these issues. So require anti-phishing MFA for admins there, require MFA for all users is there, require device compliance we've already built out for you to deploy. But if you wanted to bring in any of your custom policies that you've built, what you do is you go create new policy template, you select the golden tenant that you want to pull from. I believe it's this one here. And so require phishing resistant for admin centers. It then grabs all the different components that were selected. So Sai went through and grabbed those 72 different roles. They're already selected, so you don't have to do that manual work again. Hit next. This feature here, I think, is one of the greatest things you saw. Was like Sai is super familiar with conditional access policies, but even still, it's a maze to find things. So you're able to come into Augment and say, either add to the policy that was already there, um, and tag things as either a required field or an optional field. So I'll mark these as optional, and you can add specific instructions, exclude um, sync accounts, and have notes for your team. Optional travel group exclusion. Um, so you can have notes for your team. So as they're deploying these policies, those things never get missed again. Or they have the context as to why they may not need to include those things. Hit next. You can see there's the optional inputs, the required input, the name. I didn't add a description, but you can create. It's going to bring that template in. It's all done. So we've done that now. We spent the last 40 minutes. We probably maybe half that time was building the policies. Um, Now we want to deploy those policies out en masse to our customers. You can do that either individually, sending them at one at a time. What we recommend and is brings back to the point of like standardization, building baselines for what different customers need. So you might have a service level 1, 2, and 3 kind of breakdown within your client base. Service level 1 needs like MFA and block legacy authentication. Service level 2 needs phishing resistance, and you have location based. And then service level 3, when you've deployed out Intune and device management, those get the device compliant policies. So creating a new conditional access policy baseline, I'll go into here, I'll go block legacy and an MFA enforce. I'll go service level 1. This is for all SL1 customers. Save that baseline. Do the same thing. I'm going to go block legacy MFA and um, grab some duplicates. But the idea is that you grab all the policies that are relevant for now. Service level 2. I've created that baseline. Now with an augment, you can say to your techs, and you don't need to be a Microsoft expert anymore. You can say, go to this customer, new customer here, deploy out the our service level 1 baseline to them. So I can come into here, service level 1. I can see all the details. They're going to be included in the policies. I go next. There's a required input. I can't hit next. I can't miss it. I'm going to exclude the user. This company might not actually be working in Augment because this is my test system. Let me pick a better company. Service level one. I'm going to grab the right groups, the right user groups for those fields, exclude the users. Next, next. And I've deployed 2, 4, 15 policies in a few clicks. So these are all going to go out and we'll see the synchronizing with Microsoft. These are the new policies that we just pushed out. So once you've built those baselines, or like you build it once in Microsoft, you pull it into Augment. And I think in 3 minutes, we built 2 baselines and deployed out 2 policies to a customer. So it makes it a lot easier to deploy out a robust conditional access policy stack and without constantly referring back to the playbook documentation that you might have in like your IT glue or your other repository of information for like how does that policy built again? What menu do I have to click? What tenant should I be referencing for how it's done and going back and forth? Um, Felt really quick, but that was that's the goal is to make it fast in to get your companies up to a compliant standard that you've built out.
Yeah. Build it once, right? Scale it up, break it up the how you want it. Maybe mix it up a bit for different client cells. As we talked about,
Exactly.
different clients, different needs, right?
Yeah, and that's the other big one. Stop building policies bespoke for each customer. Figure out what your baseline is, and as an MSP, are you just going to have everybody on a specific standard of like a CIS standard, or build out a like I showed service level one, two, or three that meets your customers' needs, and then just standardize on that. It makes the whole process a lot easier, both on your team for managing the policies, and then also figuring out where things go wrong and when, be it a breach or any changes that you need to make to your policies or a lack of access into Entra. Um, a few questions. I've answered a few by type. Will the slides and video be shared? Absolutely. We will get that all to you after the session ends. Sai, for you, what if you have users in AVD? How do you prevent token theft?
I
This is
unfortunately Microsoft doesn't support the token protection in the AVD environment, session host environment.
yeah.
Um, so typically their recommendation is making sure you connect you first of all secure the devices that they're connecting to AVD from. So you can have token protection apply to their Azure Virtual Desktop connection issue. Sorry, the application, but within the actual environment. So what some people do, depending on your use cases, you have other conditional access policies that compensate for it. So if I had a workforce that was working remotely, and it was like a remote accounting team that supported this client I had. So they're all in AVD. So we had policy that would like enforce token protection on their devices that would protect their way to connect to the session host. And then I would have a different policy to apply for specifically the session host because you can scope it down to specific resources. And so in that session host protection, I would basically limit their access where they could only access resources. So if a token was exempted, it could only access stuff from their actual session host location, whether it's my IP scheme or the actual device itself. So those tokens wouldn't work outside the environment. It's a little bit more restrictive, so it really depends because maybe you have a more hybrid workforce where they can go to the session host and they have to use their own devices. So, it's nuanced based on what your actual use cases are.
And then one from the chat. When you were saying about scanners, does conditional access have an effect on SMTP relay as it as that is not using an account to sign in and should be locked to a specific IP inside your network by the firewall?
It can. It depends on how you have the relay set up and then what conditional access policies you have. Um, yeah,
Like many things in Microsoft, it depends.
yeah,
And you need to have the specifics there.
yeah,
That does kind of tie into our next session. I can't remember the working title of it, but it's all about location based policies, how to use them, and the how to manage them as well, because making constantly managing exclusions for people's travel, and that workflow is tedious, um, and particular.
yeah. We'll talk about more specifics about good practice for setting up geofencing, how to manage that so it's not out of hand when you have hybrid workforce and people traveling, how to make travel exceptions, and then also like that scanner policy, we can build out more layered of what that looks like, and again, naming conventions, strategization groups. Yeah, we'll get into the nitty gritty on that one next time.
If anybody has any other questions, feel free to reach out to Sai or myself. I believe our emails are in the invite. But if not, support can get them to you pretty easily. Happy to jump on a call and review things and just have a consultant kind of conversation about um, augment best practices or Microsoft best practices, or if anything jumps out at you afterwards and you want any questions on the what we talked about, feel free to reach out as well.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
See you guys soon. Bye.